Okay, we're back with Thomas Taylor on Aristotle's philosophy, Book 2, Chapter 3, and we'll just get right into it. The next dogma which demands our attention in the physiology of Aristotle is this, that there are not many worlds, or in modern language, many systems. As his arguments in defense of this dogma possess an invincible force and are accompanied with his usual pregnant brevity, I shall give them in his own words, accompanied with the luminous commentary of the accurate Simplicius. So, same format as the majority of this. All right. So, Aristotle, let us now assign the reason why there cannot be many worlds. For we have said that this must be considered if anyone does not think it has been universally demonstrated about bodies that it is impossible there should be any body beyond this world, but conceives that the assertion only applies to bodies indefinitely situated. Okay, so of course, Anaximander was the most famous proponent of many worlds, but it's not clear whether Anaximander was simply talking about many solar systems or what the scope of his many worlds was. And I never put the link in the mathematic way. Would you mind dropping the Jitsi link in there?
Sure.
Appreciate it. All right. So, footnote Simplicius, probably. Aristotle, having shown that there is not a body infinite in magnitude from this, that neither the heavens are infinite, nor the sublunary elements, he consequently began to inquire whether, though the universe is not an infinite body, it may not be of so great a magnitude as that there may be many worlds from it. But then, omitting the problem, he was willing, first, to investigate universally if there is a natural infinite body, which also he investigated in the third book of his Physics, and demonstrating that there is not, he at the same time shows that beyond the heavens there is not any body, neither infinite nor finite, neither imaginable nor sensible. Then also he used more logical arguments. Again, therefore, demonstrating that neither the body which is moved in a circle is infinite, nor any one of the bodies which are moved in a right line, and concluding that the body of the universe is not infinite, he afterwards discusses the inquiry which he had deferred, viz., whether there may not be many worlds. All right. Aristotle. All bodies, therefore, abide and are moved, both by violence and according to nature. And violent motion, of course, is just defined as motion contrary to the natural motion of a body. According to nature, indeed, in that place in which they abide, and to which they tend, without violence. And in that place to which they tend without violence, in that also they abide without violence. But in that place in which they abide with violence, to that also they violently tend. And in that place to which they violently tend, in that also they violently remain. Farther still, if that lation, motion in a right line, is affected by violence, the lation, contrary to this, is according to nature. All right. Footnote 7. Aristotle here, previous to the things to be demonstrated, assumes two axioms. One, that all natural bodies both abide and are moved according to nature and by violence, and to that in which they abide according to nature, they also tend according to nature, and on the contrary, in that to which they tend according to nature, they abide according to nature. Again, to that in which they abide by violence, they tend by violence, and in that to which they tend by violence, they abide by violence. But the second axiom is that to the lation which is violent, the contrary to it is according to nature. And that's really just by definition, because again, violent motion is defined as contrary to natural motion. Aristotle. But if the earth which is there is impelled to the middle, which is here, by violence, it will tend thither from hence according to nature. Okay, so the hypothesis, which obviously he doesn't mean, is that if the earth by nature did not tend towards the middle but had to be violently moved, then it would naturally tend to flow away from the middle. And if it abides here without violence, it also tends hither naturally. So by these axioms, we know that if something naturally remains where it is, its natural motion in the first place was towards thence. It also tends hither naturally, for the motion which is according to nature is one. Okay. What he means by that is not immediately clear. I guess that the motion and the tendency to remain in its natural place is one natural tendency. It's not like the motion and the abiding are two separate attributes of the thing. Okay, so footnote 8, Simplicius. Aristotle, proposing to demonstrate that if there are many worlds, they will be similar to each other and composed from the same bodies, brings this hypothesis to an absurdity, viz. That there will not be one motion, but two motions of each of the simple bodies. For the earth, in another... Oh, I see. Okay, that's an interesting proof against many worlds. Earth naturally tends towards the center, but then if the other worlds have the same elementary substance, Earth, and their Earth tends towards another center where they are, then Earth in general, which is the same in both places, will have two different natural motions, which violates the oneness of natural tendencies, which Aristotle just referenced. Clearly not the best argument, but it relies on Aristotle's geocentric cosmology. For the earth in another world, being of a similar species with the earth which is here, and having the same tendency which he shortly after demonstrates, if it is moved to the middle of this world, it is either moved by violence and contrary to nature, and will evidently be moved to the middle of the other world according to nature, or it is moved according to nature, for it is admitted that the contrary to nature is according to nature. To that earth, therefore, there will be two motions according to nature, and contrary to each other, i.e., from the middle of this and to this middle. For the earth there, being above this, will in its motion tend from the middle of our world, and having the same tendency with our earth, will tend to the same middle. Yeah, so the many worlds is literally, he's talking about many solar systems. That's the level that this is being addressed. And you can't have two centers of gravity because then there'd be contrary motions of a thing which are both natural. But if the lation of that earth from thence hither is not according to nature, it will be according to nature to it to remain here. For to that to which to tend from hence thither is contrary to nature, to abide here is according to nature. But in that in which anything abides according to nature, in that it is also moved according to nature. Again, therefore, it will have two natural motions, one from the middle thence, and one to the middle here, which is absurd. This absurdity, however, he omits, but adduces another when he says, for the motion which is according to nature is one, as the word for evinces it being a causal conjunction. Alright, so Aristotle. Again, it is necessary that all the worlds should consist of the same bodies, since they are naturally the same. It is also necessary that each of the bodies... I wonder if he proves that. He just said it so far. It is also necessary that each of the bodies should possess the same power, as for instance fire and earth and the elements which subsist between these. For If these are homonymous and are not predicated according to the same form as the elements which are here, okay, so this is an interesting connection regarding the homonymy of the different elements. He kind of assumes that there would be something called by earth, fire, air, water there too. That is, I believe, just going to be an assumption. But then he examines the possibility that those similar labels would be homonymous and actually the natural tendencies, the inherent form of those elements are different. He should be examining the possibility that maybe they would be entirely different elements too. And then this is kind of an interesting insight into homonymy versus synonymy. So, of course, in the categories and on interpretation, we learn about Aristotle's treatment of homonymous and synonymous terms and what you can validly deduce from them. Homonymy is a source of a lot of sophistical devices and just errors in reasoning. So, anyway, here we have the vague implication that when things are termed synonymously, it's because they have the same form. So there's Simplicius, of course, would make a kind of Platonist interpretation out of that, but I think it should be kind of remembered that we know if something was homonymous, it would not be predicated according to the same form. So the contrary or corollary to that would be if things are synonymous, they do participate of the same form. And this is from where in Aristotle? From the Physics, but I don't know which book. For if these are homonymous and are not predicated according to the same form as the elements which are here are predicated by us, the universe also will be homonymously called the world. Okay, so that's the reason why. So a world ought to be synonymously predicated a world ought to consist of the same formal elements, the same forms ought to obtain there. And if something had totally different elementary forms composing it, it would be homonymously termed the world. Which, okay, strengthens the idea that synonymy is tied to sameness of form. It is evident, therefore, that one thing among them is naturally adapted to tend from the middle, and another to the middle, if all fire is of a similar form, and each of the other elements in the same manner as the parts of fire which are in this world. But that this must necessarily be the case is evident from the hypotheses about motions. For motions are finite, and each of the elements is predicated according to each of the motions. Hence, if the motions are the same, it is necessary that the elements also should be everywhere the same. The parts of earth, therefore, in another world, are naturally adapted to be moved to the middle of this world, and the fire which is there to the extremity which is here. This, however, is impossible. For if this happened, I just want to check in on the strength of the stream. Yeah, it's not keeping up the fastest. I'm on a different setup here. So if it's not watchable, if you're dropping large sections, go ahead and let me know in the chat, please. Okay, so for motions are finite, and each of the elements is predicated according to each of the motions. Hence, if the motions are the same, it is necessary that the elements also should be everywhere the same. The parts of earth. Okay, interesting. So, if the motions are the same, and the motions are sort of just determined by what directions are possible a priori geometrically. And so if those motions are going to be the same, the natural motions, then they're the same basic elements. Because basically what he's saying is what the elements are is what they do, and what they do is how they move. There are only so many natural possible motions, therefore there are only so many natural possible elements. And yeah, the motions are finite. So this is an interesting argument. Any world would have to have the same basic types of motion, and the elements are defined according to their natural motions. So therefore they have the same elements. Okay. The parts of Earth, therefore, in another world are naturally adapted to be moved to the middle of this world, and the fire which is there to the extremity which is here. This, however, is impossible. For if this happened, it is necessary that Earth should tend upward in its own world, and that fire should tend to the middle. In like manner also, it is necessary that the Earth, which is here, should naturally tend from the middle, being moved to the middle, which is there, in consequence of the worlds being thus posited with reference to each other. Footnote footnote 9. Simplicius. Aristotle here, in the first place, shows that if there are many worlds, it follows that they will consist of bodies the same in species, and alone differing in number. Fire and earth in the middle elements possessing the same powers as here. Fire everywhere possessing heat and levity, and earth coldness and gravity. I don't think he addresses heat explicitly yet. I'm also going to just put in the chat in the stream about the latency. It's too bad to be watchable. Please. Okay. But he shows this as follows. Those who say that there are many worlds say that they are similar to each other, so as to remain the same in species. They're worlds synonymously predicated, and to be alone numerically different. If therefore the worlds are naturally similar, they are composed from bodies specifically the same. So the bodies belong to the same species, and which have the same power, for instance, from fire and earth, and the middle elements, and the body which is moved in a circle, for that is thought to be a world which is composed from these. But if it should be said that the elements in this world are homonymous to those in another, but not synonymous, and of the same species, it is also necessary that the things composed from them should no longer be of the same species, as it was supposed they are, but that they should be said to be worlds homonymously. Yeah, and that's, I don't know if that's a valid conclusion, that if the parts of something are of a different species than the parts of something else, then the wholes cannot be of the same species. Actually, obviously, that's not ultimately true, because substrate independence is possible in information systems. So despite the parts being of different, although you could say the parts of the information system are not the physical media, but instead are like network components, like whatever logic gates, etc. So maybe it does work, but that possibility is still, I don't know, maybe a world is something like an abstract network, and a world can exist on different substrates and still be a world. I guess this is relevant to discussions of virtual reality and whether virtual worlds are real worlds or not. If therefore they are supposed to be of the same species, it is also necessary that the things composed from them should be specifically the same. But if the worlds are homonymous, it is requisite to explain what the nature is of each. Having shown this, therefore, he adds that which is consequent to the elements in the other worlds being of the same species with those that are here, viz., that in those worlds also some things are moved from the middle and others tend to the middle, since fire also and earth are there, and all fire is of the same species with all fire, and in a similar manner each of the other elements. For just as the parts of fire, earth, and the other elements are of the same species with each other in this world, so the elements in the other worlds are of a similar species to the elements in this world. But he shows that one thing in those worlds, viz., fire, is moved from the middle, but another thing, viz., earth, to the middle. The demonstration, too, is founded on the hypotheses concerning motion, which were pre-assumed by him in the beginning of this treatise, and which he calls hypotheses, as with reference to the things demonstrated from them. In these hypotheses, therefore, it is shown. So they're not like unqualifiedly hypothetical. In their own section, the conclusions about motion were demonstrated, so they weren't merely hypothetical for Aristotle. But now that we're deducing from them, relatively speaking, they're hypotheses. In these hypotheses, therefore, it is shown that with respect to all simple lation, one is from the middle, another to the middle, and another about the middle, since the lines according to which motions are produced, two are simple, viz., the right line and the periphery. It is demonstrated, therefore, that simple motions are definite, that there are two motions in a right line, and that each of the elements receives a specific distinction according to them. Hence, if these alone are simple motions, not only here, but also if there were many worlds, but the elements are not bounded by any other motions, the bodies of the elements will evidently be everywhere the same. Okay, so 1 second. Aristotle. For it must either be admitted that there is not the same nature of simple bodies in the many worlds, or those who assert there is must necessarily make one middle and also one extremity. This, however, being absurd, it is impossible that there should be more worlds than one. Okay, so that was all pretty much clear from the argument so far. Footnote 1. Having shown the absurdities which attend the hypothesis that there are many worlds composed from bodies of the same nature as that of simple bodies, and having the same motion and the same middles and extremes, he now shows that those who assert simple bodies to be of the same nature must necessarily admit that there is one middle and one extreme, each being numerically and not specifically one. So I don't know exactly how he demonstrates that in what just preceded. We'll see what Simplicius says. Because that is the move that you could take, that middles are specifically one, but not numerically one. So there are multiple centers of gravity. Like, that is the correct answer to this problem. But he somehow proves that there is numerically one middle. I can only think that he's just sort of assuming that there's one, three-dimensional field in which all of these things exist, and there can therefore be only one middle and one extremity. But the motion of things, heavy and light, is to the middle and extremity, so that not only the above-mentioned absurdities will follow from admitting that there are many worlds, viz., that earth will tend upward and fire downward, and that each of the simple bodies will naturally have contrary motions, but still more, in addition to these absurdities, this absurdity will follow, that simple bodies will no longer be that which they are said to be. For instance, fire will no longer be fire, nor earth be earth. For if the essence and existence of each consists in such a motion according to nature, so Simplicius makes this explicit, which I thought was implied, that like the nature of the elements, or essence of the elements even, their form is determined by their natural motion. This motion being changed, the essence of them must also necessarily be changed. If therefore there is one middle and one extremity, each being numerically one, and that's what has not really been demonstrated, that there is numerically one middle and one extremity. he just kind of mentions that it must be the case. It is impossible there should be more than one world, for every world must necessarily have a middle and extremities. Hence it follows that those who assert that the simple bodies in all the worlds have the same power must also admit that there is one middle and one extremity. And this being admitted, it follows that there is one world and not many worlds. Yeah, and I guess what really wasn't demonstrated is that they are numerically and not specifically one, the middles and extremities. We could examine closer where the false assumption was made. I guess we probably should. Where does he say there must naturally be one middle? For it must either be admitted that there is not the same nature of simple bodies in the many worlds, or those who assert there is must necessarily make one middle and also one extremity. He says they must make one middle and one extremity. I think to make, if they are the same, the assumption is that if fire in all worlds is the same, they're the same because of a shared natural motion, and that motion must be towards the numerically one middle of all things, instead of they are the same specifically because they tend towards the specific middle, not the numerically one middle of the whole system. So that's the false assumption. Because it could be the case that fire is fire, and what fire naturally does is move to the relative extremity. It does move essentially to what is by nature an extremity relative to a center of mass, but not that one middle is one in general among all the worlds. That I'm pretty sure there wasn't even an argument for. It seemed to be obvious. Okay. And it's interesting that Simplicius observes a possible way around that, and he just says that Aristotle has demonstrated that it must be numerically, not specifically one, as if Simplicius had contemplated the possibility of there being the same elements that move towards, the middle, the extremity, where those are termed synonymously but not numerically one. Interesting. So, all right. Okay. This, however, being absurd, it is impossible that there should be more worlds than one. But to suppose that simple bodies have a different nature, if they are more or less distant from their proper places, is irrational. For of what consequence is it to assert that the length of their distance is this or that particular quantity? For they differ according to ratio, by how much the more they are distant, but their form is the same. So, this is just another argument for why the elements have to be the same, because why should they be different just because they are farther away? 2. He here solves a certain objection, which may be made to what has been said, viz. That the earth is, or rather, the earth in another world does not naturally tend to the middle of this world on account of the great distance. Which again is like the true answer, and Simplicius sees it, but then is like, but Aristotle solved it. Okay. To assign, therefore, says he, distances as the cause why bodies lose their proper powers is absurd, for they are not another nature, that is, another motion naturally, in bodies, or there is not another nature, another motion naturally, in bodies that are thus simple, if they are more or less distant from their proper places. For what difference does it make in this world for a thing to be distant such or such a length? Perhaps the difference is only this, that when they are moved from a more remote place to their own proper places, the motion is at the beginning weaker, and by how much more the length of the distance is, by so much the weaker it is. But the former species of the motion, whether the distance be greater or less, remains the same. It is insane, like how much of the correct modern physics solution Simplicius is seeing, explicitly mentioning, but then he's like, but Aristotle actually addressed this. And of course that physics understanding was not there in Simplicius's day. So this is just kind of funny. All right. So I guess that's an example where they, like later Neoplatonists, just gave Aristotle too much credit. In trying to harmonize, Aristotle had to be right about things that Plato never maybe explicitly addressed. But all right. Besides, it is necessary that there should be some motion of them, for it is evident that they are moved. Okay. Shall we say, therefore, that they are all of them moved by violence and with contrary motions? But that which, in short, is not naturally adapted to be moved cannot be moved even by violence. Okay, so one solution is that there isn't one natural motion of these elements. All the motions are violent, and you can have two violent motions that are contrary to each other. A violent motion is contrary to a natural motion, but supposedly you could have multiple violent motions which are contrary to each other. So being contrary to natural motion implies violence, but being contrary to violent motion doesn't necessarily imply that it is the natural motion of a thing. Footnote 3. And so Aristotle, of course, is going to address this contention. So what is not naturally adapted to be moved cannot be moved even by violence. So I guess the beginning of the argument is something like, if all the motions are violent, then the things are not naturally adapted to be moved because there isn't a natural motion which they possess. Therefore, they're not movable because there is no natural motion that they receive. Something like that, probably. Footnote 3. That to each of the simple bodies there is a certain natural motion has been shown in the beginning of the treatise, when it was demonstrated that the motion in a circle belongs to a fifth body, and that the two simple motions in a right line are the motions of the sublunary elements. But he also will speak concerning them in the third book of this treatise, that it is necessary, therefore, there should be a certain natural motion of simple bodies. He shows, assuming as evident, that all the simple bodies in all the worlds are moved. And because the simple bodies in this world are seen to be moved, and the worlds are supposed to be similar to each other, and because natural especially differ from mathematical bodies, the former being moved and the latter being immovable, he reasons proceeding in effect as follows. The simple bodies in the worlds, since they are moved, are either alone moved according to nature, or they are moved by violence and contrary to nature. But if they are moved according to nature, we have the thing investigated, i.e., that it is necessary there should be a certain motion of them according to nature. But if they are moved contrary to nature, with all contrary motions, such for instance as from the middle and to the middle, it was easy to show that this is impossible from what has been admitted. For it was admitted that the motion which is contrary to the motion that is contrary to nature and violent is according to nature. So the solution is that what's contrary to that which is contrary to nature is actually according to nature. So the possible rebuttal that Aristotle mentions that, oh, well, these are all violent motions and none is naturally contrary, these are all violent motions and there isn't a natural motion, violates what he said about the nature of violent and natural motion, namely that the contrary of a violent motion is going to be the natural motion. But if they are in any respect moved, it is evident that they are naturally adapted to be moved. For to things which are naturally adapted to be moved, there is always a certain natural motion which they are adapted to be moved. So yeah, he does make the argument that I assumed he was going to make, or at least Simplicius does for Aristotle, that when something is movable, it has a natural motion, and that natural motion will be some particular natural motion. And the reason is wonderful. For everything contrary to nature is present together with that which is according to nature, and that which is and that which is according to nature not existing, neither will that which is contrary to nature have a subsistence. Sure. Okay. So all the motions can't just be violent, because violent motion depends ontologically on the natural motion. Okay. If, therefore, there is a certain natural motion of these simple bodies, it is necessary that the motion of things of a similar species and of each of them should tend to a place which is one in number, for instance, to this particular middle and to this particular extremity. So he says again, he just concludes that it is necessary that the motion of things of a similar species and of each of them should tend to a place which is one in number. Why not one in species? I don't think that argument was actually given, ever. Couldn't fire just tend to the relative extremity, always? Because then fire, in general, has a natural tendency, and all the other arguments work. But if the motion is two things which are the same in species, and these are many, maybe now he's finally going to directly address why numerically there has to be one middle. So if the motion is two things which are the same in species, and these are many, because the individuals also are many, but each of them is without any specific difference. So there is like one species of middle, but there are many in quantity. This part will not be of one species and that of another, but all of them will similarly possess the same species. So this is the contrary case to look at. Is there generically or specifically one middle that these elements tend to or away from, but it's many in number? So he lays that out. For all of them are similarly without any specific difference from each other, but any one differs from any other in number. So that's the thing he's going to try to refute. But I say this, because the parts which are here and the parts in another world subsist similarly with respect to each other. Hence, the part which is assumed here will have no difference when compared with some one of the parts which are in another and in the same world, but will subsist similarly with reference to all, for they will not at all differ from each other in form. Okay, so the form of a thing defines whether it's synonymous and of the same species or not. So the middles of these different worlds will not have a difference with each other regarding form, which relativity gives you, mathematically speaking. But let's read Simplicius, and then we'll see how Aristotle thinks he's going to address that. So footnote 4. Having shown that each of the simple bodies has necessarily a certain natural motion, he consequently shows that of all those bodies which are of the same species and of individuals, there is a natural motion to a place numerically one, for instance, to this middle in this world, and to this extremity, or to the middle and extremities in another world. For if heavy things naturally tend to the middle, they either tend to a middle, which is numerically 1, or to a middle, which is specifically 1, but numerically different. Yeah, so this is finally, hopefully, the argument why they can't just be numerically different, but specifically 1. It may perhaps be said that as with respect to things heavy and light, each is one in species, but many in number. So the middle to which heavy things and the extremity to which light things tend, and or rather, are each of them one in species, but many in number. And that some things tend to this extremity, but others to others, which are specifically the same with this, but numerically different from each other, in the same manner as the bodies which tend to them. Thus, there will be many worlds, the same in species with each other, but differing in number, and separated from each other. If, therefore, says Aristotle, this should be said by anyone, we must reply to him that with respect to that which ranks as a particular, this particular will not consist of such and such parts, but that of different parts. For a particular clod of earth in another world is not specifically different from, but similar to a clod in this. For all things, according to species, are similarly without difference with respect to each other, though one is differing in number from another. Not only things here with respect to each other, and in a similar manner things which are there, but also things which are here with reference to things which are there. And a part of earth or fire which is assumed here has no difference with respect to the remaining part of the earth that is here, it being specifically the same. In a similar manner, neither has it any difference with respect to the parts in another world. As therefore the parts of earth in this world, being the same in species but differing in number alone, tend to a middle which is 1 in number, in a similar manner the parts of earth in another world, which are of the same species with this, will differ from them in number, will tend to this very same middle. And the assumption is that the natural motion of these bodies is to numerically 1 middle, as opposed to their tendency is to a center of gravity. And their natural motion is to tend towards the closest center of gravity, or some combination of the biggest and closest, which would solve all these objections, because it is, of course, the true answer, but they're just not seeing that possibility. For although Simplicius does get very close to it, it's like crazy. For why, since all the parts of this earth are the same in species, but differ in number, do these naturally tend to this middle alone, and not to another, but the part because of the distance of the relative middles? But the parts of another earth, which are specifically the same with the parts of this, but not only differ in number from each other and from the parts of this earth, why do they no longer tend to this middle, but to another of the same species with this? It's funny because he already mentioned that the distance could affect the strength of the natural motion. So things which are more distant tend more weakly. He already has all the necessary. It's as if he must have seen like every necessary premise has considered, but is just saying that Aristotle has addressed all of them, which he has not. For if the difference, according to the number of things which are moved, is the cause of places differing in number, it will be requisite that each of the heavy bodies that are here, and which are alone numerically different, should separately tend to another and another middle. Okay, so if the difference according to number of things which are moved is the cause of places differing in number. Okay, so if just which clod of earth it is determines which middle it moves to, then all of these various clods of earth should be moving to different places, but they're all moving to one place. Well, because they're all close to the one center of mass of the earth, which we observe. But okay, it is really funny because he mentioned specifically the distance being. Like, you could just put two into it. He said if something is more distant from the natural object of its motion, that motion could be weaker. So if there were multiple middles that it could be moving to, the thought that, well, whatever has the strongest attraction to it because of its distance, even without the mass question, because of its distance, that will be the direction of its motion. Like, he got so close. If he wasn't so much of a dogmatist, like maybe he would have thought differently. Simplicius, that is. Okay, so that it is necessary. And how much longer does this go? Actually, we'll go ahead and this was a good enough place to stop. We'll pick up here right after footnote 4. I'm trying to highlight the document and it's not working, so we'll just have to remember. We'll leave this page up. Any thoughts on the reading today?
Sure, I've been taking notes. I'll just go through kind of the notes I took. So the synonymous, it means to share the same form. It can be, things that are synonymous have the same species. Homonymous does not share the same form. Um, yeah,
But is termed
yeah,
with the same name.
yeah, right. The uh, the essence of the elements is determined by their natural motion.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Simplicius keeps getting it right, but falls back on Aristotelian dogma. Uh, if you are contrary to your natural motion, it implies violence, but also you have to have natural motion to have violent motion because they depend on each other. Something that's movable has natural motion, and it will have some particular motion that's natural to it. That's all. I had put some about the middle, but I didn't fully grasp the idea of you have one species of the middle, but many different quantities of the middle. It seems like with gravity and all that, yeah, we seem to have many different middles based on where we
Yeah.
are.
Middle could be specifically the same wherever it is, but it's a relative term instead of like it's one geometrical location. Which I wonder if you put together like Aristotle's idea of place, the place of the middle, does that imply that it's numerically one? But let's not try to do that now because I would have to go find his definition of place again. But anyway, a lot of good stuff, interesting notions. So we'll go ahead and wrap up. Thank you guys for joining. Talk to you soon.
Thanks. Talk to you later.